He did give us a talk last year. So if you really like what Hugo has to say, then you'll be able to find his talk from last year on the talks on the website, as I just showed you. But Hugo, I'm going to pass straight across to you to get you to introduce yourself and welcome to today's conference. Thank you very much, Hugo.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And so that was me about to go off mute. Then I felt my hay fever coming on, so I quickly went back on mute. So it was let's pretend it was a test. Yeah, so thank you guys. So I guess first of all, thank you guys again for inviting me back to this responsible sourcing, responsible raw materials summit. It's really good to see all the different sessions that have occurred, and I think all super relevant to what I'm about to go into as well. So hopefully you guys will agree that we fit in quite well within the schedule. Yeah, as Sarah said, my name is Hugo Brodie, and just to kick off with a little bit of personal history about me, I'll just set my timer on so I don't go over too far. I think I'm right in saying I'm the first VP for sustainability the LME has ever had in its 144-year history. Unless there was some sort of short-lived sustainability team back in the roaring 1920s that didn't make it to the LME's history books. But I suppose this is sort of unsurprising, considering the LME sustainability team was officially formed in the middle of last year, towards the end of last year. So this is not to say that that this was the first time the LME ever focused on ethical or sustainable projects. And I'm hoping there's a few producers of base metal brands out there, or those who are involved in the LME value chains, tuned into this webinar on YouTube, who already have some idea of the responsible sourcing work we've been working on in the last few years. So this work so far has particularly centered on, and for those who saw my presentation last year, you'll know this, on the ethical sourcing of minerals when it comes to human rights, as in preventing child labor and conflict minerals mitigation, which I'll cover very briefly in my 10 minutes in a little bit. However, since I spoke at this webinar last year, our sustainability strategy has moved on in order to, amongst other things, and amongst other sustainability aspects, help facilitate the huge decarbonisation task that we all collectively have and share. So this is probably a good point before we dive into what sustainability means for the LME and base metals, to give a little bit of insight into what the LME is and who we are. As I know, hopefully most people will know, but you never know. So I'm going to give my attempt to share my screen. There we go. Seems to be working. Yeah, so who are we? Well, in a nutshell, we are a forwards exchange of the world's largest market in options and futures or forwards contracts for base metals. And the services we actually perform and are, well, the first one's pricing, so the price generated by those in our trading floors, our trading platforms at the moment are used in procurement contracts globally. The second is hedging, and users can protect against volatile markets and adverse price movements. And we've seen some particularly strong markets this year in terms of pricing. So users can use the LME for that via our members. And finally, and the reason we're a little bit unique and why responsible sourcing and sustainability and ESG is very important to us is when a futures contract comes to expiry on our market, it's possible to actually take delivery of metal from one of our licensed warehouses around the world. So there's a physical delivery component. So often as a last resort, metal that meets LME requirements, which up until now have been only chemical and metallurgical and shape requirements, but will now be, as of this year, and the reporting year has already started, ethical requirements too, can also be delivered onto the exchange. And this is vital for our users in order to discover prices that are relevant to them. So sustainability. So what has the LME been doing recently and trying to do in promoting responsible raw material work. And given that we as an organization all never really directly purchase or sell metal, what can we do? So those of you who tuned in last year remember, so in 2017, we began our responsible sourcing journey, mainly focused on human rights as a direct response to growing concerns from us and our stakeholders that our listed brands should only be sourced meeting internationally accepted standards for human rights. So since then, in our view, the responsibility debate, which in 2017 we felt was most primarily focused on conflict minerals, has moved on to incorporate a much broader spectrum of sustainability issues. And we're conscious that in respect of environmental considerations, in particular, there is a clear call now that companies in our value chain and markets, ourselves very much included, should now be doing more and be doing better. So just as an anecdotal personal example, when I first started attending these sustainability-focused metals conferences only a few years ago, the attendees used to be one or two OEMs, a few hipster-type specialist sustainability-focused hedge funds, and now it's very positive to see that the vast majority of stakeholders in the base metals world, at least, are starting to take notice, and many actually are seen as leading the charge at many of these events. So at the LME, we believe that the metals industry can and should be the cornerstone of the sustainability and the energy transition. And this slide here hopefully gives a bit more information as to the broad categories that we see we can and already are directly contributing to as a base metals industry and across the value chain. So the first, of course, is responsible sourcing, which I can cover a bit more in a second. Then was also low carbon production. Green technology is our third category we see. So things such as supporting industry actors who are pioneering sustainable technology like electric vehicles. And then finally, the circular economy, so the aim of eliminating waste and the continual recycling of resources. So as this next slide suggests, we're proud that the LME, we're already contributing to what we see as a more ethical future. So as this slide lays out, we believe we can contribute across our base metals with our current service offerings. So a quick example is within the circular economy, for example, our aluminium alloy contracts already service the scrap and recycling industries, and they do this by allowing metal recyclers to plan and have fair pricing for their raw materials. We also have a number of contracts that help with EV battery development, so our cobalt, nickel, and lithium contracts. So it's really now our core aim that LME deliverable metal is seen as sustainably sourced, and that our services that we provide are kind of helping our industry contribute to a more sustainable future. So what are we doing in terms of responsible sourcing and human rights, which I know I touched on very briefly last year, but I'll spend a minute or two on it. So after much market engagement and using the OECD guidance as our foundation, we're introducing responsible sourcing requirements. So requirements focus on human rights, mitigating against child labor for all of our LMEs, the LME's 450 plus deliverable brands across the world. So for all of our physically delivered contracts. So now it's a rule that if you want to list metal on the LME, you have to do the appropriate due diligence when it comes to ethical, responsible sourcing in terms of human rights. I think this slide. So how will, I'm jumping all over the place. So how will this work in practice? So in particular, as I said, our approaches are grounded in the OECD guidance. The 5 steps are built into our strategy. We have 3 tracks. You can use an OECD aligned route to comply, or you can use the LME's red flag assessment template to comply. But crucially, whichever track a brand selects, they'll be able to complete the OECD 5 steps. You can find out more about exactly how this will work maybe you can tune into last year's webinar. I think it's available on YouTube, or we have webinars on the LME website which show exactly how this will work in practice. So what else are we doing in the near term to support other categories outside of human rights of sustainability, including transparency of low carbon production in the aluminium industry and other industries. Well, our plan in the next few months is to launch LME Passports, which is our new platform that will enable the attaching of voluntary sustainability metrics to brands. So what is LME Passport all about? Well, essentially, initially, it's a digital credentials register. And interestingly, its first goal is to deliver safeguarded, accessible electronic certificate of analysis information for every lot of metal delivered into and following withdrawal from the LME warehouse network. And again, the first goal was initially aimed at reducing the operational burden of using the LME by removing the need for paper certificates of analysis. But we realized we can also add a second goal when designing this platform. And the second goal of LME Passports, beyond the core mission of electronifying COAs, is to enable the system to support additional information for both LME brands and non-LME listed brands, information provided on a voluntary basis. So for example, low carbon production information can be appended onto this transparency platform. So interested producers could input, for example, the environmental criteria of their metals brands, or maybe a certification by an industry scheme. So for instance, in aluminium, it could be the ASI, Aluminium Stewardship Initiative certification. They could show consumers that they have met these goals or the thresholds for ASI. But essentially, the system will allow all market users to view the information to increase and promote the transparency of sustainability metrics globally. And we're initially prescribing that only LME members and listed warehouses, companies, or producers will be able to undertake the uploading of data, just so we know we have a relationship with those who are going to be enabled to upload this type of information. So just in the interest of time, I'll quickly show this last slide. So the idea here is to give an idea of a type of data we expect that's going to be voluntarily uploaded to Passport. So here's a slide showing our yet to be finalized proposed LME Passport value add themes. So our near-term primary question that we're discussing with our stakeholders involved in the base metals industry, our producers in particular, is how best can we develop this platform so that it sorts and demonstrates sustainability information clearly, particularly low carbon production information in the aluminium value chain. And we know this is an area where a great many stakeholders have invested a great deal of time and money, and this will give some oversight as to our initial thinking. The caveat being that this taxonomy is by no means set in stone, and we're still keen to hear from interested parties to see if we've got our categorization right. So in wrapping up, given my slightly going over, so I suppose we're by no means saying that we are have I stopped sharing? Hopefully I have. So we're by no means saying that we see ourselves as the world experts on all areas of sustainability within all of the LME's metal value chains. And one of the most important aspects of my role at the moment is listening to those who are the experts, such as those coming up next after me and in the previous day of these sessions, who are experts and understanding how this subject is evolving. So please do get in touch if you think there's an area of focus that we at the LME should be getting more involved in, or support, or areas where we can support the great work that we're hearing about for the rest of today as well. So one thing that's clear to me as the longer I've been focusing on this area is that no matter how much we want, the problems and answers aren't black and white. They're more often many, many nuances that you only get to grips with when you're putting theory into practice. And so as an exchange, we're obviously centered at the very center of global markets. So we have a fantastic opportunity and responsibility to act as catalysts for the sustainable development of these markets that we run. So yeah, I'll probably leave it there and open up to 1 minute of Q&A. Sorry about that.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Hugo. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in putting your hands together from behind your muted microphones and to say a massive thank you to Hugo. And don't worry, mate, you've got a whole 5 minutes of questions. So no, that was fantastic.
Preemptively started my clock and it was worrying me, but
No, so ladies and gents, if you've got questions for Hugo, please do feel free to put them into chat or into the Q&A, or if you're on YouTube, please do put them into the chat there as well. Just while they're coming in, so firstly, Hugo, congratulations on being the first VP of Sustainability for the LME. That's absolutely brilliant, and it's really interesting, I think, to hear the positioning that the LME is taking with regards to that. That's absolutely fantastic. Just in terms of, the passport, etc., and I guess this new criteria that you're asking people to be able to prove that they can adhere to. Now, obviously, you're aligning to OECD, which is great, and we do actually have a talk from the OECD later on this week, which will be fantastic. But in terms of verifying that what somebody is telling you is true, how is the LME going about verifying I guess the truth and the honesty in terms of the data and the intelligence that's being uploaded into that platform?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there's two distinctions really. So for human rights and our OECD guidance-based rules, so there are actually going to be requirements that brands of the LME have to meet in order to be an LME brand. So, and we felt there was a clear global definition already available, which the OECD had spent years working on when it comes to child labor and the mitigation of conflict minerals. And that is actually going to be due diligenced by our brands having to comply with a standard that's been OECD aligned and the standard's own auditing requirements from on the ground independent third-party auditors who will need to approve them. When it comes to sustainable production, let's say in climate change and carbon production, we don't yet see there's a globally accepted across all base metals definition that stands out and is accepted by those in India, those in Norway, and that where they all agree on what constitutes low carbon production throughout their value chains. So at the moment, it's going to be voluntary uploading of sustainability metrics that we expect from those type of producers. But there is a lot of work out there, and we expect what's going to be voluntarily uploaded are things such as the ASI aluminium certification, which has got cradle to gate analysis of sustainable production within the aluminium value chain. And we're going to see what's going to be most uploaded, what's most useful to people. And from there, we can also see what our consumers will also be searching for when they're looking for low carbon produced aluminium. So that's the distinction between, I guess, human rights, where we see it as a universally accepted definition, and then low carbon production across all value chains, which is still not quite there yet, but we think it's coming. So
is that something where I guess it'll be a sort of an iterative approach? So as you can see where the best practice begins to emerge, that's the avenue that you'll then begin to support. Would that be a correct summary?
I think that's fair. And we also are in ongoing conversations with both the ASI and the International Aluminium Institute, who again have done about 2 decades worth of work trying to understand exactly where emissions take place from your bauxite mine to your smelter. There's also various innovations where we've heard about where there's neutral carbon anodes that produce less carbon in the smelter. So there's all these different types of technologies, and we're trying to just understand how best they will be equated or worked out. So yeah, so I think that's fair. It's an iterative approach.
Fantastic. No, that's brilliant. Thank you for that, Hugo. So one final question before we pass to our next speaker, and this comes from Shivani in the chat. And Shivani says, is there an analysis of the level of green premium on commodities that have passed the LME responsibility sourced requirements? Do you have any comments on that?
So there are various different news agencies, CRU, Fast Markets, Platts, who all now are publishing a low carbon aluminium price. I don't think any of them have published it being anything above 0 yet, but I think the general consensus is that there will be a premium for low carbon produced aluminium. But again, it's going to very much depend on the definition that different producers are using, because what you don't want is greenwashing and a producer just selects the definition that suits their value chain best, and then the definition that completely excludes the entire market. So there's not any impetus for them to go further and meet these targets. So it's a difficult one. But as the LME, I can't comment on pricing directly. So I could just say there are these new news services out there that are looking to produce these prices.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Hugo. And I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got other questions for Hugo, do feel free to post them into chat or into the Q&A, and he'll be happy to answer them. So, ladies and gents, put your hands together for the fabulous Hugo Brodie. Thank you very much, Hugo. Brilliant.
Thank you for having me. Cheers. Thank you.